Professor Carafit here to talk about chapters 37 and just like a page of chapter 38, the nervous system. So, in order to understand the nervous system, we need to recall stuff we learned about in our previous coursework. We can't forget the stuff from Bio 1. It's the foundation of all the rest of your biology courses. So, first of all, cells have membranes composed of phospholipid bilayers, right? And there's proteins embedded in those membranes. I'm sure you recall this from Bio 1. Also, diffusion. This is because molecules are in random motion, and they will always go from a concentration of high to low. And then another thing you learned about in Bio 1, the sodium-potassium pump. That's used usually as an example of active transport. And if you recall, active transport is when we use ATP or some other energy source to pump things from low to high concentration. But it requires energy. Okay? So these are all things from Bio 1 that you'll need to understand in order to make sense of how the nervous system functions. So we're going to concentrate on how nerves fire and a little bit about the diversity of nervous systems. That's kind of where we're going. Okay, so there are different kinds of neurons in the body. There are sensory neurons that transmit information about touch and smell and things like that. That allows you to see, smell, and feel. Interneurons, these integrate information. Integrate. This is an important term. Integrating is when you analyze and interpret what's happening. That's what's going on in your head, right? You know, in your internal you're like, oh, this feels hot. That means I shouldn't touch it. That's integration. Motor neurons are neurons that transmit signals that cause you to move. Okay, so you touch a hot pot, your interneurons go move that hand, and then your motor neurons fire and your hand moves. So these are major categories of neurons. Neurons are these, well, we'll look at what nerves are and neurons in just a little bit more specifically. Okay, so just to see this in action then, when you have here, we're going to use a snail as an example here. This snail is sniffing around for something to eat. It's using its sensory neurons, so sensory input. It's tasting or smelling the water. Oh, there's a smell of a fish out here. It integrates that information, meaning it's processing it and goes, oh, that's a fish. Then the motor neuron responds and its little harpoon shoots out to capture the prey. So there's a sensory input, followed by making sense of that sensory input through integration, followed by a response via the motor output. Now, a lot of animals, not all animals, but more complex animals like, let's go up from like worms on up perhaps, have fairly complex nervous systems that have two major components. One is the central nervous system, often abbreviated as the CNS. This is where integration takes place. This is the brain and like your spinal cord, for example, in humans. The peripheral nervous system, the PNS, this is the system that carries information to and from the central nervous system to the muscles and other places of your body. Okay? So the central nervous system is kind of the headquarters, as it were. It's your brain and the spinal column, the spinal cord, and then all those little nerves that branch off of that throughout the body are the peripheral nervous system. And when those neurons, which are individual cells, when you bundle them together, we call those bundles nerves. Okay? Nerves. I'm sure you've heard that before. All right, so now I'm going to show you my little friend. This is a little octopus, smaller than the size of your hand. For reasons which you can probably see, it is called the blue-ringed octopus. And it's a really interesting creature. You do not want to get bit by a blue-ringed octopus. Okay, so it has saliva. It has a little beak. It'll bite you And in that saliva is a neurotoxin. That means a toxin that affects the nervous system. And what the neurotoxin does is it blocks sodium channels, all right? Na+, sodium ion channels. So in your membrane, you have channels that basically allow for the diffusion of sodium, okay, from one side of the membrane to the other. But this bite of the octopus plugs up those channels. All right, so what, right? Who cares? Why would that matter? Well, let's try to figure that out. So that's what we're going to focus on as we talk about how the nervous system works, is why being bit by this octopus is bad news, okay? So let's start with the anatomy of a neuron. All right, neurons, these are individual cells, and then here's two stuck together. We could call, all of these stuck together a nerve, right? So here is a neuron. It consists of a cell body, which is what you'd think of as a normal cell that might have a nucleus in the middle, like this one does. Then the cell body on this end has little branches called dendrites, which dendrology is the study of trees. So dendrites are like tree-like branches coming off of the cell membrane. They're extensions of the cell membrane. This is where they receive information. Okay, information comes in via the dendrites. All right, then we have coming out of this side another structure, which I'm going to draw very crudely here, that ends also in kind of branches. This looks terrible, but it's awesome. This is called the axon. This is where information is sent. So once information comes in to the dendrites, it then makes its way, the cell sends a further signal down the axon, and so the axon of this cell is going to basically be really close to the dendrites of the next cell in line, okay? So we have dendrites, we have a stimulus coming in, a signal will be sent down the axon to the next cell, and then that signal will be sent again. And here, where the axon of one cell and the cell body or the dendrites of the following cell meet up, they actually don't touch. There's actually a space between them. So there's a space between these structures, and that space is called a synapse. A synapse. They don't actually touch. There's a space between. And so in order to get a signal to go from one cell to the next, there has to be exocytosis of some kind of chemical, and those chemicals are called neurotransmitters. Okay? And that's how the signal jumps from one cell to the next, is the transmission of those neurotransmitters through exocytosis. So these are the major parts. Now, before we move on to the next video, I'll introduce to you one more thing. In those cell membranes of these neurons, we have lots of different proteins, including something known as voltage-gated ion channels. In this case, we have a voltage-gated sodium channel. But voltage-gated channels, if you recall what channel proteins are from Bio 1, they're a protein that allows something to diffuse through a membrane from one end to the other, right? But these are gated ion channels, which means they can shut. Now, in this case, a voltage-gated ion channel opens up in response to a change in charge. So a voltage-gated ion channel will open or close, I guess you could say, open or close, depending on the charge around it. So it's like a door that will open or shut depending if the charge around it is positive or if the charge around it is negative, okay? And if it opens, that allows diffusion to take place. If it shuts, that stops diffusion. And you can see here, it has this structure at the bottom that can it can open or shut and plug up that that channel and stop the flow of molecules. Okay, so voltage-gated ion channels are found in the membrane of those neurons, and those neurons connect to each other. They don't actually touch, but they have a little gap between them called a synapse. And so if a signal is sent down one neuron, it gets to the next one, little chemicals diffuse out, neurotransmitters from one cell to the next, causing the signal to keep going and to be sent further. And that's how signals are sent from the central nervous system through the peripheral system and back again. All right, so we'll pick up from there and talk about how signals work in the next video.